Barefoot Cavalry, BarefootCavalry.com, Fiddler on the Roof. Posted August 8, 2018 by Yojak454. When the CIA released Osama bin Laden's Bloodlines of the Illuminati, I was curious since it was searchable in the first place. Having seen it before but going into it anew, I focused on the name Collins. I went to school with two Collins brothers. They were fairly decent ball players, and back in the 60s, ball was all. The ball, the ball, the ball. Mr. Collins was a building contractor, and he aroused the interest of many persons in our small New Jersey town. He began construction of the Masonic Lodge, and upon its completion, Mr. Collins was unable to obtain a CO, which is a certificate of occupancy. The structure had no windows. It was eventually allowed to open. This Masonic Lodge was a poor man's version of the Skull and Bones location at Yale. Mizpah was connected to the once Freemason Lodge in our small New Jersey town, the result of two lodges merging, which has now disappeared. Mizpah, New Jersey, is an unincorporated community located next to Mays Landing. God rest Billy Mays. It wasn't the OxyClean that got him. It was the cocaine. OxyClean is good for the environment. Cocaine is bad for your health. Billy is buried in Beth Hammerdarash Hagodel Cemetery, Orthodox Jewish Cemetery, in McKees Rock, Pennsylvania. As the industrial age increased the wealth of the worldwide Jewish community, it appears as though there was a coming together for a common purpose. Scattered to the winds by the Lord their God, the Jews, even in rebellion to their God, exhibit an intellect and industry not found in any other group on God's green earth. As intellectuals sought to define new political models for societies yet to be, many Jewish thinkers were exposed to the political reality of the times. In Europe, many were open to communist and socialist thought. Europe had a banking class that was predominantly Jewish, owing to centuries-old tradition where usury was outlawed by the Roman Catholic Church. Eurasia was a totally different place. Jews were living in shtetls, which were isolated farming communities built around the Jewish religion as a social order. Islam and its social order were stolen and incorporated from Judaism. When radical ideologies took hold among the Jewish people living under the Tsarist government in Russia, there were to be reprisals against those who would challenge the structure of the Tsar, who quite frankly thought that he was governing directly beneath God. There was no Jewish banking house named Rothschilds in Russia, as Tsar Alexander I resisted encroachment from the Rothschilds banking house. Russia was very backward and feudalistic. Its people suffered on many levels even when life was good. The Tsarist rulers of Russia began a systematic persecution of Jews. Most lived in places where they could not be a problem, except they sought to organize a revolt, or at least to effect changes in society so as to advance themselves. In every political system, the same kind of people rise to the top. Politics is just a vehicle to power. After Alexander I refused the offer of a Rothschild central bank for Russia, the seeds of doom were sown upon this land of despair. The royals in Russia spoke French at court. Catherine the Great was more debauched than Queen Elizabeth's relatives in Germany during the time of Napoleon. These royals were fiends. The radical Russian Jews are akin to those who seek power in any political system. When radicals step out of the shadows, a crazed, ugly face is the last thing many see. As Jewish industrialists and investors across Europe gave shelter to Marx et al., they also mobilized globally to effect the migration of Russian Jews and Jews from Eastern Europe to other nations worldwide. Societies sprang up to enable agrarian-based living in lands pre-scouted, to place Jewish settlers in isolated areas, encouraged to become fruitful and serve industry, but also to stay separate and apart. At the same time, there was a coming together of a new royalty, money. Just as there are individuals in every political system who rise to the top, in business, there are those who are driven to amass fortunes that never take a day off from increasing. As Jews in Europe pooled money into aid societies and endowments, trust busting in America saw the advent of endowments or foundations of wealthy philanthropists. Out of Europe, societies sprang up, reaching out to America. Please interpret as reaching out to the moneyed in America, not Americans. The Pilgrim Society comes to mind, but before that was the, started by Rothschild's frontman in America, J.P. Morgan, elite Corsair Club, which birthed the Pilgrim Society. Through these ties, the United States were eventually ensnared in 2 world wars. Just as Baron de Hirsch dedicated much of his accumulated wealth to the cause of Jewish migrations around the world, so did Baron Edmund de Rothschild. Born in Munich in December of 1931, Baron Maurice de Hirsch inherited the family fortune founded by his grandfather, Baron Jacob von Hirsch. He was described as being a very alert child, and his level of comprehension interfered with his ability to stay focused as a student. He showed business acumen while receiving his education in Munich and Brussels. When Maurice was 23 years old, he married the eldest daughter of Raphael Bischofsheim and became a clerk in the firm Bischofsheim and Goldschmidt in Brussels. Baron de Hirsch went on to build railroads in Europe and Russia, at the same time as John Forbes Curry's great-grandfather, William Hathaway Forbes, had done in France. It appears that the money which caused railroads to be constructed, other than government grants, originated from the same few hands. When you think murder on the Orient Express, you're really not far off the mark. Bankruptcies and Ponzi schemes are not new ideas, and many times those who end up with bargain-priced enterprises were part and parcel to the failure in the first place. It appears de Hirsch was really more visionary than he's credited with. Upon the completion of the Chemin de Fer Oriental, the Oriental Railway, de Hirsch was hailed as a man of vision. A concession was awarded by the Turkish ruler to van der Elst and C. The Turkish ruler, Abdulaziz, canceled the concession. The deal itself was handled by financier André Legrand Dumassi, who received a title at the papal court. André attempted to build a Catholic financial empire. Along the way, he garnered an international reputation as a financial genius. The Catholic financial empire was a money magnet and a public display designed against the universal perception of Jewish dominance within the financial sector of Europe and the world. In the crash of 1870, André declared personal bankruptcy, triggering a major political scandal in Belgium, but before this he was involved with Baron de Hirsch on several rail projects. It appears that the failure of André Legrand Dumassu, who was condemned in absentia in a trial that ran for 7 years, 1872 to 1879, was actually a plan to weaken the enemies of the Rothschilds. Baron Edmund de Rothschild was born in Paris, August 19, 1845. He entered the banking house of the Rothschild Frères on his father's death, joining his elder brothers, Baron Alphonse and Gustave de Rothschild, and immediately became active in support of Jewish communal activities and institutions worldwide. Paris is known as the City of Light, illuminating light. If organizing is the key to everything radicals seek to do, is it radical to believe that the Jewish money tree in Europe organized to overpower everything? Langrand Dumasu had brokered the initial deal for van der Elst, and for some reason had taken over the construction of the line and proceeded to run the project into the ground. Baron de Hirsch received a second concession from the Sultanate and founded the Imperial Turkish European Railway, headquartered in Paris, to build the line in 1869. This particular part of the project failed in negotiations, and de Hirsch then founded the Oriental Railway, also in Paris, which filled the bill. Should we seek to tie the thoughts of Marx and Engels to the rise of socialist and communist thought among the Jewish peasants of rural Russia? The printing press was their greatest weapon, and the books and pamphlets that were churned out were received, as well as any of the common sense pamphlets of Thomas Paine in America. The homegrown press in the steppes of Russia proceeded to feed hopeful minds in a sea of misery due in part to palace intrigue against inbred rulers. Russian rulers were so far removed from everyday life that Tsar Nicholas II, in an answer to Kaiser Wilhelm II, said there would be no war with Japan because, quote, he did not wish it, unquote. Wilhelm and Nicholas were cousins, as well as the British royal family, the whole bunch. The Rothschilds sprang from Germany. The royals were actually pawns in the death waltz of war. Rebels were raised in Russia steeped in communist thought. Radical Jews caused a crackdown by the Tsar's secret police as the initial steps in a grand plan that would ultimately remove the Tsar's bloodline and unleash upon the world a century of death and destruction. Baron de Hirsch completed his railroad in time to accept displaced Russian Jews from Tsarist purges who had made their way to Constantinople into Europe. The Jews who were concentrated into Europe from Russia were to ultimately be used as pawns for the creation of a Jewish homeland under a UN mandate after the Second World War. It's really hard for one to wrap the mind around planning such as this, as even reverse engineering it will break your mind. The lives of countless millions lost in the 20th century cannot be counterbalanced by the countless millions of dollars amassed by a few. A previous blog, The Bowery, related that Ned Harriman traveled to Siberia after stopping in Alaska, which was overflowing with gold. Not really a stretch to believe that Harriman transferred an enormous sum of gold to disaffected royalty and military in Siberia, thereby affecting the outcome of the upcoming Russo-Japanese War. The same Ned Harriman visited Japan before the end of that war. Whose agent was Ned Harriman? All the money was originating from the same hands for railroads worldwide, just as these same hands got into petroleum worldwide. They sought to tie the world into a package, and they realized it would be a better place for them if there weren't so many dirty people. Ned's son, Averill, would become U.S. ambassador to Russia and a confidant of Arm & Hammer. Averill lived to see his father portrayed in the 1969 production Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I can still hear raindrops keep falling on my head. Piss on them. Back to Mizpah. Mizpah was one of the colonies in South Jersey that was not associated with organizations funded by de Hirsch. There is a short list of failures where speculators were involved. Mizpah, New Jersey is one of them. It is located in Atlantic County, New Jersey, which in the days of Prohibition was a Republican stronghold run by Nucky Johnson. Nucky did not have a gang per se, but everything happened under his watchful eye. During Prohibition, approximately 40% of the liquor that reached U.S. shores did so through Atlantic City and Atlantic County, New Jersey. So it was only right to hold a get-together for the gangsters who ran the juice of the Roaring '20s. Here she comes, Miss America. In May of 1929, 3 months after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, what was to become La Cosa Nostra met at what was known as the Atlantic City Conference under the cover of Meyer Lansky's honeymoon. He's a Russian-Polish Jew known to take orders from the Canadian crime family, the Bronfmans, who are some kind of knights from Jerusalem awarded by, you guessed it, the British royals. La Cosa Nostra means our thing. Mizpah means watchtower. It was between Jacob and his father-in-law Laban, a figurative watchtower commemorating the agreement between two men as God is witness between you and me. So therefore Mizpah is a boundary marker between the members of the commission, respective territories, a boundary that shall not be passed to do evil. So Billy Mays ends up in Atlantic City in 1983, cutting his teeth on boardwalk splinters, selling to tourists in New Jersey. A really rough profession. New Jersey can be worse than Philadelphia because, as Ben Franklin said, New Jersey is a beer keg tapped at both ends. Billy, an endearing sales legend, died in Odessa, Florida, close to St. Petersburg, which was founded by a Russian land developer. But hey, the Tampa Executive Airport must have been cool for business.